Hannah Tailford's body, naked except for stockings and underclothes stuffed into her mouth, was found in the river. In April, the river cast up at Chiswick the nude, tattooed body of Irene Lockwood. She had not been dead for very long. The same month, a mile from the river, another tattooed prostitute, Helen Bartlemy, was found in Brentford. Acton again, July. Mary Fleming's body was dumped in a cul-de-sac. In the night, neighbours heard a car stop, reverse and roar away in panic. 4 months later, victim number 5. The tattooed body of Frances Brown, a witness at the Stephen Ward trial, was found in a car park. For 6 girls, such curbside encounters have ended in death. The killer is still at large.
In the 1960s, a killer would terrify the London suburbs by preying on young girls who had turned to prostitution to help them survive in the big city. At least 6, but probably 8, women lost their lives to the cruel and sadistic killer who seemed to be roaming the streets of London. It didn't take long for the killer to gain the moniker Jack the Stripper. This nickname was given due to the location of the crimes and the involvement of prostitutes as victims, and the way the killer left the bodies partially or fully unclothed. It would become one of Britain's biggest manhunts ever, and just like the killer's namesake, they would never be found. It would remain one of the largest unsolved murder cases in Britain. In the 1960s, the areas the bodies were found were mostly industrial parts of London. The Thames riverside hosted many forms of factories, and the population consisted mostly of working-class families. Before the first recognised victim, 30-year-old Hannah Tailford's body was found, there were 2 other women found that could have been killed by the same person. In June 1959, during a routine patrol of Duke's Meadows in Chiswick, the police were walking along the towpath of the Thames. On the scrubland beside the towpath, they discovered the body of a woman. Her dress was torn from the waist up, exposing her breasts. A pathologist concluded that death had occurred between midnight and 2 a.m. on the day she was found. Marks around her neck were consistent with strangulation. Her underwear, handbag and shoes were missing, and no other personal items were found. They needed a positive ID, so they placed a post-mortem picture of her in the local paper, and she was recognised by her mother and roommate. She was identified as 21-year-old Elizabeth Figg, a known prostitute who had last been seen getting into a car with a client. The police determined, after a fruitless search, that Mrs. Figg's handbag and other missing items had possibly been left in the client's car, but without a description of either the car or the driver, the case went cold. Another possible victim was 22-year-old prostitute Gwyneth Rees, a young Welsh girl who had relocated to London. On the 8th of November 1963, her body was found dumped on a refuse disposal site approximately 40 yards away from the Thames and the part where Miss Figg had been found. She was found naked with only a single rolled-down stocking on her right leg. Horrifyingly, it was rumoured her head was decapitated by one of the workers who had been levelling the dumped rubbish with a shovel. Some of her teeth were also missing. Why were they never linked to the other victims? Aside from the fact that they were found at a different dumping site and Miss Figg was not mutilated like the others, most of the evidence suggests a connection. The first official death attributed to the killer was that of 30-year-old mother of 2, Hannah Tailford. Hannah had been missing for about a week and was sadly pregnant at the time of her death. She was found on the shore under the London Corinthian Sailing Clubhouse on February 2nd, 1964. Her front teeth were missing and her underwear had been shoved into her mouth. She had also been strangled. They eventually found out that her body had gone into the water at Duke's Meadows Park. Although they interviewed many people who had known Hannah in one way or another, nothing came of the interviews, and the attention of her death died down. It was shockingly almost considered she had taken her own life. Things were about to change when 9 weeks later, on April the 8th, 1964, another woman's body was found on the foreshore of the River Thames. Another petite young woman, 25-year-old Irene Lockwood, a young woman from Nottinghamshire, was found apparently strangled and naked. It was also discovered she had been pregnant at the time. Now, the police couldn't deny what was happening and had to link the death of Anna Tailford with this recent murder. A pattern had emerged. All the girls were prostitutes, yes, but they were also similar in stature. They also linked the death of Gwyneth Rees, but it's not known why Rees wasn't on the official victims list. The newspapers were all over this story, and the police couldn't deny they had a serial killer in their midst. The media now naming the killer Jack the Stripper. Jack was quick, and within weeks he had struck again. This time the victim, 22-year-old Helen Bartholomew, was found strangled with some of her teeth missing in an alleyway on the 24th of April 1964. This case would give the police their first piece of solid evidence. Specks of paint were found on her body, the sort used in car spray painting. The police became convinced that the killer worked in car manufacturing, and maybe they were close by in one of the local businesses. On a couple of occasions, the police were told by people living close by that they had heard a car late at night close to where the body was found. The police presence was now heavy in the area. They dressed policewomen up as prostitutes to try and lure the killer out. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The killer was relentless. On the 14th of July 1964, 30-year-old mother of four, Mary Fleming's body was found on Berrymead Close, Chiswick. Mary had turned to prostitution when her marriage had broken down and she needed to supplement her income to feed her children. Once again, paint spots were found. Her front teeth were missing. She had been strangled and she was naked. Once again, a car was heard reversing at speed away from the scene. The police were now hoping the killer would make a mistake. They would be disappointed. 21-year-old Margaret McGowan, who used the alias Frances Brown, was discovered on the 23rd of October 1964 in a car park on Horton Street, Kensington. This murder was only different in the fact that she was a more upper-class prostitute who worked in a more affluent area of London. She had been strangled and her teeth were missing. She was also naked. She had last been seen by a friend getting into a client's car in October. This friend was able to give a description of the car and the driver. It came to light that McGowan had been a witness for the defence in the trial of Stephen Ward, one of the political figures involved in the Profumo affair, a high-profile British political scandal at the time. It had also involved Christine Keeler and Mandy Rice Davis. A connection was considered that some of the women had attended underground parties, and it gave the police some hope. The description given by Brown's friend, fellow prostitute Kim Taylor, was huge. Could this be the break they needed? Unfortunately, even with the identikit picture, it wasn't enough. The year was now 1965. On January the 11th, 27-year-old Bridget O'Hara was reported as missing. Her body would be found on February the 16th, 1965, near a store shed on the Heron Trading Industrial site in Acton. Industrial paint flecks were found on her body, and it was concluded that as her body was mummified, her body must have been stored for some time in a warm place before being dumped. John DeRoos, or 5-Day Johnny, named because of his ability to close a case quickly, was put on the case as chief detective. He mobilised a huge investigation that consisted of investigating and interviewing all 7,000 workers on the industrial estate. Plainclothes police were put in place to record all licence plates coming in and out of central London at night, making sure a note was made if a different licence plate showed up on multiple occasions. DeRose delved deeply into finding where the paint that had been found on 4 of the victims originated from. After an extensive search that covered 24 square miles, they found a match under a nearby transformer. Opposite, just a few feet away from where Bridie O'Hara had been found, was a spray paint shop where a match to paint found on the victims was found. They now believed the transformer was where the killer had stored the bodies. An excited DeRose informed the press they were close to catching the killer. He then made a statement that they had narrowed down the suspect list to 20. He then went on to claim the list had gone down to just 3. It hadn't. It was a false statement. But oddly enough, the killings apparently just stopped. No arrests have been made since that day. The women who were brutally murdered and their families, who lost their mother, sister, daughter, will never see the perpetrator of this heinous act brought to justice. But there were suspects. The main suspect was a middle-aged Scotsman who worked as a security guard at the industrial estate. His name was Mungo Ireland, and he did have access to the lockup where they believed the bodies were kept. The police were sure it was him. They kept a close watch on him. Ireland knew he was being watched, and he became more convinced he was going to be arrested when DeRose mentioned in an interview, without naming anyone, that the killer was a married man with children, and he, DeRose, knew who the killer was. Not long after this, Ireland left a note for his wife. It read, "I cannot stick it any longer. It may be my fault, but not all of it. I'm so sorry Harry is a burden to you. Give my love to the kid. Farewell. Jock. P.S. To save you and the police looking for me, I'll be in the garage." After Ireland had died, the case was shelved. DeRose was said to mention that the killer had taken his own life. It wasn't until a book about the murders came out, written by David Seabrook, that the name of the suspect was revealed. The book also claimed that Ireland had only been working at the Heron trading estate for 3 weeks. Seabrook suggested that DeRose, not wanting his reputation sullied, pinned the murders on a dead man. It was revealed in 1972 by journalist Owen Summers that Ireland was in Scotland when O'Hara was killed. Therefore, he couldn't have been the one to kill her. Additionally, it was discovered that she was one of the victims of the stripper killer, which suggests that he may not have been involved. But then why would DeRose risk his reputation telling people there would be no more murders if he wasn't 100% certain? And he was right. There wasn't. There were other suspects. Freddie Mills was a champion boxer. In fact, he was the light heavyweight champion of the world in 1948. He was also friendly with many of the London underground gangsters. It's rumoured he was in debt to the Kray twins, often being seen at private parties thrown by the Krays and others. There are a few rumours around regarding Freddie Mills, so it's difficult to know the truth of this one. It's also believed that some of these gangster friends were sure it was him who committed the murders. His death allegedly had a twist. It's been rumoured that he arranged with the Kray twins to have himself killed. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. He was found in his car in July 1965 with a shotgun in his lap and a bullet through his eye. The timing of this also coincided with the end of the murders. Bizarrely, 3 weeks after Irene Lockwood was found, a man called Kenneth Archibald walked into a police station and confessed to killing her. But his story didn't seem to fit. There was no evidence and plenty of inconsistencies. At his trial in 1964, he recanted his confession, stating he was drunk when he made the statement. He was found not guilty and let go. Many years later, a Welsh author investigated and wrote about a disgusting individual called Harold Jones. Jones was a convicted SO and murderer, At the age of 15, he was arrested and acquitted in a sensational trial in 1921 for the killing and R-ing of a young girl in his hometown of Abertili in Wales. After his release, he went straight out and committed the same crime again, but this time the young girl was found in his attic with her throat cut. After confessing, the judge at his trial sentenced him to the maximum he could give a person under the age of 16. His story is long and horrendous, but just for context with this case, we need to look at this guy. Jones served his time in Wandsworth Prison, London. In December 1941, at the age of 35, he was released and seemed to vanish. He resurfaced towards the end of the 40s, having changed his name to Harry Stevens, and now lived in Fulham. By 1962, he had vanished again. The author Neil Milkins, who was researching his crimes, found it difficult to trace him from then on, but eventually found Jones had died in 1971 and buried in Hammersmith Cemetery, West London. He had apparently decided to stay in London, where he met his wife and had children. It's not altogether wrong to look at this guy. After all, he was a vicious killer living within proximity of the murders. Firstly, he was a convicted killer of young girls. The victims of the Jack the Stripper case had that petite young girl look about them. He stored the bodies before disposing of them. He lived very close to where the Hammersmith murders occurred, and also lived just a few streets away from the victims, Hannah Tailford and Bridget O'Hara. Just as compelling is the fact that he apparently worked as a panel beater on the industrial estate where the bodies had been stored and where the paint had been traced to. He also worked as a caretaker on the estate. Lastly, the murders stopped around the time Jones discovered he had bone cancer that would eventually kill him in 1971. There is no evidence to say Jones was involved at all, nothing. But saying that, Jones is a really good contender. We'll probably never know who this killer was, and it's unfortunate that this brutal killer has managed to escape justice. Thank you for watching.